Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sakalas back for another preview. Alabama versus Oklahoma upcoming this Saturday. The Crimson Tide traveling to Norman, Oklahoma. The first game for Alabama against the two newbies, or one of the two newbies in the SEC. Of course, Oklahoma and Texas joining this season. Should be a fun one, a cool trip to Norman, Oklahoma for Alabama. That game, 6:30 p.m. And it's on ABC, no ESPN Plus for Alabama fans to deal with this week with Mercer last week. I'm sure that frazzled some, when Alabama wasn't on the major outlet. But don't have to worry about that. Alabama's got the fun nightcap ABC game against Oklahoma. The Sooners came into the season rather with some high expectations, have really kind of struggled in their first year in the SEC, particularly in conference play. They're 1-5, 5-5 overall. They have not won an SEC game since they beat Auburn at the Plains 27-21, which go watch the highlights of that game if you haven't to see how Oklahoma won, because it was quite something. Oklahoma's only win since that game, 59-14 over Maine. So not a team coming in with very much confidence, Tony, versus Alabama, of course, on a real nice run of momentum. Of course, the big win over Mercer the other week. They've rattled off 3 straight since the Tennessee loss. Just what are your opening thoughts on this one as Alabama heads to Norman to try and keep their strong form going?
Well, when you put it like that, it doesn't look good for Oklahoma on paper. This is not. I feel like there was a little bit of like heading into the season. I kind of thought that this game could end up being not as great. I had some skepticism about Oklahoma's offensive line because they basically got to replace their whole offensive line. But then I kind of figured that maybe the Sooners would be gelled a little bit more heading into this one. And I also thought that Jackson Arnold was going to be substantially better quarterback than he's been. And those haven't been the cases. Oklahoma's offensive line is just porous. It lets in a sack every 5 seconds. And then Jackson Arnold, maybe partially because of that, has just been pretty average this year, maybe even below average at times. So it's not the blue blood matchup that it looks like maybe with the logos. It's definitely kind of weird to say. I mean, how is this for the new age SEC? Alabama is going to Norman, Oklahoma to play a trap game against the Sooners. I mean, that is the weirdest sentence in SEC, both because, I mean, most of the time you expect the Oklahoma to be a powerhouse, and then also just it's weird that they're in the conference now. But it's going to be I expect Alabama to roll in this one. I will say, though, it's could be a little chilly. I don't know if that will affect Alabama. It's also a night game in a big stadium on senior night. I think Oklahoma's going to have a lot to play for. They're 5-5. They need another win to get the bowl eligibility. They play Alabama and then they play at LSU. So those are 2 tough games. They're going to be kind of gearing to get this win, their last home game, and maybe upset Alabama. If Alabama comes out kind of sleeping like it did against Vanderbilt, maybe Oklahoma can make it a game a little bit longer. And the longer you get into a game like this, where you've got the crowd and some hostile maybe elements or environments, I think maybe you can make a game out of it. I don't see it happening, but I guess if you wanted to be optimistic from a Sooners perspective, there's that avenue. But this should be a game that Alabama rolls in.
Yeah, definitely agree with you on paper there. And you mentioned the kind of elements to that game, a night game in a big stadium, the senior night environment. I know Jamarcus Shepard, Alabama's wide receivers coach, used the term rat poison, referenced Nick Saban when talking to reporters this week. Wanted to throw this in here too that I forgot to mention in the intro. These teams have only played 6 times, and Alabama has not been to Norman, Oklahoma since 2002. The last 2 matchups between these 2 teams have, of course, been in postseason, so they've been on neutral sites. Oklahoma came to Tuscaloosa a year later and won that game, actually. They lead the series 3-2. There's been 1 tie.
I mean, there's been so the last one was the Tua versus Kyler.
Yep, in 2018.
Tua basically threw a perfect game in that one. like he was like, well, I think what is he, like 21 of 23 or something like that in that game. It was a ridiculous stat line. That's back when Oklahoma didn't have a defense at all either.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the one before that was the Sugar Bowl after the kick six game, and Oklahoma just kind of that was Trevor Knight actually.
Hmm.
Randomly, probably the best game of his entire life. It was also kind of like the precursor to Derrick Henry's big breakout year the next year, because Derrick Henry had a big run and he kind of like you kind of saw it, but yeah. So they've been in some, I guess, meaningful games, but this will not be one of them. I don't think so.
No, it doesn't have the same weight to it. That was in 2014. Bob Stoops was still the coach at Oklahoma, which just feels like an eternity ago. But yeah, anyway, I mean, back to, kind of this game. Like you said, it's more has the feel, less of a big game and more of a trap game. Alabama's trying to avoid the rat poison and avoid, another letdown on the road, which, it seems like the Tide has overcome that. Obviously going into LSU and doing what they did to the Tigers. But what, like I ask every week, what's been the general kind of vibe from you or from the team this week, and just going in, knowing there is some postseason stuff still on the line, which we're going to get to later on, but what's just been the vibe going in, trying to keep everything in perspective and just, add another win to your win column? Because of course a loss dooms any of the perspective talk that everyone's been having about Alabama for their postseason hopes.
It seems like they're respecting Oklahoma. It seems like they're, kind of going about things the right way, but it's tough to judge. I mean, it also seemed like they were respecting Vanderbilt, and that didn't turn out right. So it's tough to tell with a trap game, because I think a lot of these kids are just going to say the stuff that they're supposed to say. It does seem like Alabama has a lot more confidence. I think the LSU game, like you were saying, going into a hostile environment and handling it, that provided Alabama with a little bit more confidence. And so I think you look at that, they're in a good headspace. But I think it's really about, it's kind of easy to play well when your back's against the wall, and you have all these doubters, and you're hearing about how LSU is gonna. I think what did the game day crew, like all but Nick Saban, picked LSU to win that game. We're not that removed from that point where people thought they were going to lose to LSU. So it's really easy to kind of like get amped for that. I'd like to see how this team kind of responds to where everyone's now. People have gone from them losing and picking up their third loss in LSU to now. I mean, I think more people are picking them to win a hypothetical SEC championship game against Texas. It's like all of a sudden people are just really high on Alabama and they think they're going to win the SEC. And so it's kind of crazy how much of a roller coaster ride this season's been. And I just want to kind of see how Alabama handles that. Do they let their foot off the gas now that people are thinking that they're going to be the SEC champions again?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Just how quickly things kind of flip for you when you get a result like the one that you did against LSU. They've only played Mercer since that game. So, they haven't really proved in terms of building momentum. Like you said, this is kind of the first test of that, going on the road and trying to do it again against, like you said, a, team that's going to be feisty and want to come in and knock off an elite opponent at home in a night game. I liked something Jahad Campbell said this week. He, of course, before the Mercer game, kind of came out that he addressed the team and said, if you're not buying in, we don't want you to be here. We don't have time for you. We'll move on and do this thing without you. And he kind of reiterated that this week. He referenced, kind of talking to reporters in the practice facility, kind of referenced the championships on the wall and, said, use that as motivation. This is the kind of standard that you play for here. And that feels like a good thing from one of your defensive leaders and a guy who's been really good to say that and to have that kind of buy-in. It seems like Alabama, really starting to lean into that championship mentality while keeping, the game in perspective in front of them. And like I said, we'll get into some of the scenarios with what Alabama can maybe strive for this year. But let's dive into some keys to the game, Tony, from an Oklahoma standpoint, and talk about maybe what has gone wrong for Oklahoma that has made this game less of a marquee from a neutral perspective anyway. I want to start with turnovers for Oklahoma. This team has committed 16 of them in SEC play alone, which is a pretty baffling number and plays in, would you say, to Alabama's mentality of forcing them on the defensive end. I'm sure that's going to be a major point of emphasis against a team that has struggled keeping hold of the ball this year.
Yeah, I mean, because Alabama's had 16 turnovers in their last five, or takeaways in their last 5 games. So this is a team that's kind of clicking on all cylinders. Yeah, in those last 5 games, they've had 3 or more takeaways in each game, except I'm forgetting now which one of them was 4. Maybe South Carolina. But like, Alabama is really kind of going to that ethos of taking the ball away that Kane Womack kind of implements in his swarm defense. I mean, that's like the number 1, number 2, and number 3 thing he focuses on is just taking the ball away. And Alabama is really doing that, and kind of it's clicking now. You're kind of seeing Kane Womack's vision and what he kind of emphasizes in his attack. And so the fact that you have an Oklahoma defense or offense that's prone to that, I mean, the game has to play out, but 1 + 1, is going to equal 2. It seems like this is just, I'd almost be shocked if Alabama doesn't turn up and get another 3 takeaways in this one too. I mean, obviously, like, you can't take your foot off the gas, but it seems inevitable at this point. And I think another thing that was cool to see from an Alabama perspective is you finally had that non-offensive touchdown with Xavier Brown's 68-yard fumble recovery for a score. I kind of feel like that might break the seal. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw another defensive score this week, especially when you're looking against an offense that does turn the ball over. I think now that Alabama's kind of like broken the seal on those defensive scores, now you could get an interception return for a touchdown. This is like where maybe you get like a Quay Russell scoops up a fumble and runs it 20 yards for a score. I think that all could happen. So I think things are clicking. And the other thing you got to look at when you talk about matchups, it kind of probably goes hand in hand with the turnovers, and nobody is worse in pass protection than Oklahoma. They're allowing 4.1 sacks per game. That's worse among all FBS schools. And you got that's going to be challenging, or that at least opens the door for an Alabama pass rush that really has been kind of underwhelming. I think Alabama ranks like 57th in the nation, or tied for 57th in the nation in sacks. So along with those turnovers, I think maybe you're going to want to see guys like Quay Russell, like Jahad Campbell really has been the biggest pass rusher on this team. Kind of, do they step up and do they get a few sacks, and can Alabama kind of improve its sack tally and maybe get some momentum heading into the Iron Bowl and then the postseason? Can this be that kind of game that kind of jump starts the pass rush?
Yeah, that was a really good point. I wanted to ask you about that as well with the sacks, and to go back to with what you said with Xavier Brown. I think him getting that fumble recovery and getting that first non-offensive touchdown felt sort of fitting to me, because I feel like it's a example of kind of the top down buy-in from your veterans all the way down to your freshmen to this kind of swarm defense mentality. I know you talked to Xavier Brown, he kind of mentioned that, and just embracing that over the course of this season, how different that is, coming in as a freshman from high school where maybe turnovers isn't as huge of a focus, and now that is the biggest thing at Alabama. And I think that was a good example of that. And obviously a fun moment for him to, like you said, lift the seal, get Alabama's first non-offensive touchdown. But the sacks thing and the pressures, that's a good point to segue off of. Would you like to see, and I know we were talking kind of right before we came on this, we were thinking about the Georgia game. I felt like in that game I saw Alabama dial up some kind of exotic blitz packages, really made Carson Beck uncomfortable. And like you said, haven't seen a ton of that since. Is that something you think they might do against a really weak Oklahoma offensive line?
You got to be careful, because you don't want to open up doors to other things. And look, sacks are not always the best indication of pressure. I mean, if you're pressuring the quarterback, I know there's a few times where Alabama's had good pressure, but they played teams that get the ball out quick, so it kind of doesn't translate. If that's what's happening, and you're forcing Jackson Arnold to just throw passes away quickly, then I'm not really worried about sacks. I think if you overcommit to that, then maybe you open up the possibility of a big play. So I don't think you just have to like necessarily chase sacks. I just think you're going to get more natural opportunities, and you're just going to have to take advantage of them. I just don't think that the level of competition or the pass protection that they're facing is going to be as high as it has been in other games. So like for example, I thought the pass protection, or I thought the pass rush against LSU. I don't remember how many sacks they got. They didn't get a lot of sacks, but I felt like they were getting good pressure, and that's fine if they're able to do that. Then so be it. I just think against this Oklahoma team, some of that will translate to sacks. Yeah, maybe you dial up a few interesting blitzes just to kind of maybe put some pressure and maybe scare Jackson Arnold into a bad throw or a turnover like we were talking about. But I don't think you overcommit to it. I don't think you really put too much emphasis on that. You don't change who you are for somebody else.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I think it'll be interesting to see, yeah, where that balance is, and I think that's a key as well as just making Jackson Arnold uncomfortable. That is something that Alabama has been really good against a few quarterbacks it's faced this year, especially some of the more inexperienced ones. I think of Iam Aliava in that first half against Tennessee. They put him under pressure pretty well and forced a couple of turnovers, and then it becomes about how the offense obviously catches them in. You mentioned Jackson Arnold. There's been some kind of quarterback weirdness for Oklahoma. Arnold comes in as a redshirt freshman, a younger quarterback in the SEC, kind of expect to lift this team. At one point, Oklahoma turns to Michael Hawkins, a backup. They've gone back to Jackson Arnold since as the majority starter. But I know some players and even a few coaches were asked about the possibility of maybe seeing Hawkins and Arnold. What just in general do maybe both these quarterbacks bring, and how can Alabama kind of overcome maybe Oklahoma using two quarterbacks or however they choose to do that, and how maybe can both those players hurt Alabama if they
Yeah,
if
I
they
mean, well,
don't generate pressure.
Michael Hawkins is more of a running quarterback, and
Yeah.
Jackson Arnold's more of a passing quarterback. So it's one of those more obvious. If they do use Michael Hawkins, it's probably going to be in run situations. Not to say he can't pass the ball, but I, I don't really take that quarterback. I think maybe they could do something, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be when Michael Hawkins is in the game, you're probably going to be in run packages. I don't think you're going to do too much passing unless they just give up on Jackson Arnold. And I think that's kind of why they've gone to Jackson Arnold, because he can do more as a quarterback than Hawkins can. Hawkins is just a freshman and he's not there yet, So yes, Alabama struggled against running quarterbacks, so that could be something that Oklahoma implements, but I think it'd be more of a worry if we really thought that Oklahoma could just go with Hawkins. If Oklahoma felt like, okay, we can beat Alabama with Hawkins and let's try to take advantage of a running quarterback, but also make some plays through the air. I think then it gets a little bit more dangerous. If it's just the case of we're going to put in a running quarterback when we want to run the ball, then Alabama can scheme against that. And Alabama can see that coming. And you can't totally sell out to it because, yes, he can pull back and pass, but for the most part, unless you're going to actually treat Michael Hawkins like a actual quarterback and not just a gimmick or a part of a package, I don't really feel like Alabama's going to be too tested by that. I get the understanding that yes, they have struggled against running quarterbacks and he's very capable and it's hard to prepare for two guys, blah, 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 blah. In the end, unless you're going to see a substantial raise of play, then I don't think it's too much to worry about. Look, Jackson Arnold hasn't been great, and they're still going back to Jackson Arnold. So that should tell you about what that situation is.
Yeah, Oklahoma's offense as a whole it does not have too much to write home about. Tony mentioned the offensive line. Arnold has struggled. Their running back Javonte Barnes does have almost 600 yards and 5 touchdowns, but he's been injured for a bulk of the season. They have been absolutely battered at wide receiver as well.
Yeah. And they're getting some of those guys back, I believe. I have to go back and look, but so I mean, they are that receiving core that's just been decimated. It kind of reminds me of a few years back when Alabama's all of their running backs got hurt, and they had to have that to start changing people into emergency backs. I forget. It's escaping me, but I remember they switched somebody on the other side of the ball. Was it Demoy Kennedy? I think that they switched him to the other side of the ball. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. So they were having linebackers come in and play running back. So it's almost to that situation with Oklahoma with how hard they were hit at their wide receiver position. So I mean that also factors into some of this quarterback problems and combine all that with the pressure and having a young quarterback and then not having wide receivers. It's a terrible mixture. And I think that's where Oklahoma suffered. So things are getting better. The line's getting a little bit better. The receivers are getting a little bit more healthy. I just don't think it's going to be all enough at this point to beat Alabama, especially like we talked about, an Alabama defense that is kind of rolling right now.
Yeah, it's Oklahoma's leading receiver currently is Bauer Sharp, their tight end, and he is 299 yards and 2 touchdowns. So not phenomenal weapons that are gonna hurt you through the air. And you combine that with a relatively inexperienced quarterback, you get a recipe for a not super great offense that Alabama should be able to have success against, like Tony just said. A key on the other side of the ball, though, Tony, and this is where Oklahoma hangs their hat on, right? Is this defense? They have had a pretty solid unit this season. Just in general, what have you heard kind of players, coaches talk about Oklahoma's defense, and what does Alabama have to do and excel in to avoid any
It's a
danger?
defense that can rush the passer, and I think that's something that when you look at how do you affect Alabama, I think that's one of the things that if you can rattle Jalen Milroe and kind of get him out of his game, I think Tennessee did an excellent job of doing that. That's how you beat Alabama, and they've got the pieces. They've got the pieces on defense to maybe pull an upset. As bad as I feel about this Oklahoma offense, I do feel like if you did have a special game from Jackson Arnold, and he just wants to play up to his potential, all of a sudden, I do think if you then look at it, the defense can make some plays and win the game. So that's what I'm saying. Like if Alabama comes out a little bit slow or a little bit, if they allow Oklahoma to jump out to a few big plays, I think you have an Oklahoma defense that can maybe keep the Sooners in the game. They've got 32 sacks through 10 games. So, I mean, that's pretty good. They've got Mason Thomas with 7 sacks. I'm just reading out stats right now, but they've got a really good linebacker, and Danny Stutzman, who has got like 96 tackles through 10 games. I mean, that's an insane number. And he had a bunch last year too. He had 104 last year. So I mean, he's a really great linebacker, and so they've got some players, especially in that front seven. Not only can they pressure Jalen Milroe, they can stop Alabama's running game, and then that's kind of how you handle Alabama. So I like the pieces they have there. So I just don't know if it might be a case of if this Oklahoma offense can't sustain drives, can Alabama's defense kind of wear this defense? Can Alabama's offense, wear this Oklahoma defense down? That's kind of how I see it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's to me a big key is how well can you establish the run against a defense like this? Because we saw it get really one-dimensional against Tennessee, like you just said, and it got really, really ugly, especially in that second half at times with the amount Milroe had to throw the ball and just got really rattled. And I think Alabama, to me, and feel free to weigh in, they've found a good offensive balance in the last couple of weeks that I think have really helped kind of kick them on. And I think that's going to be needed on Saturday.
Well, see, I think everything goes hand in hand. The defense has been doing well at getting off the field, and the defense has been kind of rolling. But I think a lot of that is that the offense is running the ball. It's sustaining drives. It's giving the defense more of a break, and the defense kind of knows that the offense is going to pick it up, if when it needs it, or the offense is going to be able to take advantage of good scenarios that the defense puts it in. So they're kind of going hand in hand. I think that the Alabama running game and the improvement of the defense are those are that they correlate to each other. I think if Oklahoma starts stopping Alabama's run game, makes Alabama one-dimensional, and then Alabama relies on the big plays, I think that could end up hurting its defense. I mean, that's kind of what happened against Tennessee, where Alabama, couldn't get things going. The defense was strong against the Volunteers, and then eventually, just after not being able to be bailed out by its offense time and again, the defense just finally cracks. And then, you see the Volunteers make a few big plays, in the second half. That's kind of the blueprint I think Oklahoma has to take. The problem is I just don't think they're as good as Tennessee.
Yeah. I think we keep going back. I was just going to say to this Tennessee game, and I think that's a good thing, from a comparison standpoint. But in the end, it kind of just feels like the talent disparity is too big. Tennessee or Oklahoma doesn't have a Dylan Sampson. Iamaliava is a better quarterback than Jackson Arnold. They don't have the wide receivers.
The front is Tennessee's got a really good front and Oklahoma's got a really good front. So that's why I keep going back to it, because that is something that worked against Alabama that Oklahoma can try.
Yeah.
It's just you also need the other parts.
Right.
And I don't necessarily think it's there.
Yeah. I'll shout out one more name on defense just for Oklahoma. Robert Spears Jennings. He's a corner, a junior. 4 forced fumbles and an interception, along with 50 tackles this year. So he's an excellent playmaker in the secondary.
Yeah, that's what you're going to need too. That's if you go to the Vanderbilt. If you look at the two blueprints you have to beat Alabama, Vanderbilt's defense wasn't that great, but it did force some timely turnovers. So I think that if you're looking for avenues for Oklahoma to win, you're going to need some of those. You're going to need some of those forced fumbles, and then you're going to have to capitalize on literally every break you get. So there's talent there too, Jack. It's that's another thing. This Oklahoma team is not a bad team. It's full of 4 and 5-star guys. They've got some Rivals 100 players on this team. They've got some future NFL players on this team. So it's just a matter of some of those guys rising to the occasion. And they really haven't this year. But talent is talent, and sometimes in a game like this, you never know. Maybe somebody pops off and has the game of their life.
Yeah, and especially it circles all the way back to Oklahoma getting juiced up by their home environment on senior day and people hitting another gear, trying to take advantage, and Alabama obviously trying to block all of that out and play its game. And I think we both kind of can come to the consensus that if Alabama does that, it will have success on Saturday. We'll circle back to the predictions on that and get our formal score picks, even though we've kind of given a general inclining as to how we think this is going to go. But let's first talk, Tony, about some college football playoff stuff, because, of course, this is our Friday show. Alabama got its college football playoff result, or at least the latest result, as we steamroll toward, I believe it's December 8th, that the actual playoff bracket or rankings will be revealed. But the latest update, Alabama comes in at number 7. They jumped up a few more spots, and just before, from a standpoint of where this concerns Alabama at this point, I think it goes back to the SEC championship conversation. How are you feeling now with another week down and obviously still plenty left to happen in this crazy conference? How are you feeling just now about Alabama's SEC championship chances and maybe where things stand, or they're standing maybe among this 8-2 weed of teams, whether it's Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas A&M. Obviously, Texas has 1 loss, but a whole bunch of teams still kind of vying for position. How do you feel about Alabama's standing now?
Yeah, the 7 ranking, I'll get to why it matters later, but it doesn't really matter because Alabama is going to probably make the SEC championship game, where if it wins, it will be, probably the number 2 seed, but definitely get a bye. And then if it loses, it'll have to be reevaluated as a 3-loss team, a 10-3 team. So, I guess you kind of look at the 7 seed and it matters a little bit. I just, it's really looking like Alabama's going to play in Atlanta. If they win out, which they're playing Oklahoma in the Iron Bowl, and let's face it, both of those games are losable because you play in a tough environment, like we said, at Oklahoma, and then the Iron Bowl is always the Iron Bowl. It's Kalen DeBoer's first Iron Bowl, so you never know, he's been good in these rivalry games, but
it's a new level.
Auburn kind of had Nick Saban's number to a certain extent. Yeah. Look at how dominant Alabama was and how much trouble they had with Auburn. And you can say the games in Bryant-Denny, but we've never seen a Kalen DeBoer Iron Bowl. So maybe does that get in his head a little bit? You never know. I don't think it will. History says it won't, just with him in rivalry games. And so I'm expecting Alabama to roll, but let's that those are losable games, but it's probably not going to happen. Alabama's probably going to win. And if Alabama wins those 2 games, all they need is Missouri to win one of their 2 games. And Missouri is not, a slam dunk team either. But when you look at who they're playing, Mississippi State, who I feel is just a bad team. So I feel like they play on the road at Mississippi State. But I actually expect Missouri to kind of handle business this week and kind of clinch that for Alabama this week. But even if they can't win on the road against Mississippi State, they play what I feel like is a winnable game at home against Arkansas. So I'd be shocked if Missouri loses both of those. I think if they do lose both of those and Alabama wins out, then I think Georgia goes instead of Alabama just based on winning percentage. So then it would be Georgia and Texas. Or I think that really the other side kind of boils down to, is it going to be Texas or Texas A&M? And that's basically going to come down to who wins that game. And that game's in College Station. So we keep on talking about maybe Alabama versus Texas. It could actually really easily be Alabama versus Texas A&M in the SEC championship game, but I think it'll be one of those two teams. And so I think when you look at the 7th ranking, it's nice to know that Alabama is viewed above a lot of teams, but in the long run, I think Alabama really controls its own destiny with a little bit of asterisk. They need just a little bit of help from Missouri, and then I think they control their own destiny from here on out.
Yeah, so it's a comfortable position at the moment, and then you look ahead, and this is where we can get into where that matters in the long run. With that SEC championship game, of course, the big conversation is what happens to Alabama, or insert one of the other, what is it, 15 two-loss teams, it feels like, in the SEC championship game. What happens if they lose that game and drop to a third loss in terms of how they're evaluated by the committee? And so after seeing kind of another week of rankings and seeing where Alabama is, what's kind of your take there? Because of course we don't know. No one's going to really. This is the first edition of the playoff. You have no real precedent to go on. But what is your feeling there? Where you hear all this stuff of, I'd rather not go to the SEC championship game. I know Lane Kiffin spoke about that from Ole Miss's perspective. But what's kind of your take on them, a 3-loss team being reevaluated if they lose the SEC championship?
At first, I was skeptical of it, but now, I mean, like that's where that 7 ranking actually helps, because I think, I don't think Alabama, by the time they play in the SEC championship game, they might be either 6 or 5. They're going to move ahead of Indiana when Ohio State blows out Indiana, and then they're going to possibly move ahead of Texas if A&M pulls that upset. So, I think guaranteed if they win out, they'll be 6 heading into the SEC championship game. Best case scenario for Alabama, they'll be 5 heading into the SEC championship game. I don't see them going from 5 to out of the playoff, or 6 to out of the playoff, basically being punished for playing an extra game. So maybe they'll drop a little bit. Maybe they're definitely not going to host if that's the case. But I just have a hard time seeing Alabama, especially the way that they're ranked now, kind of, just be totally punished and left out for making their conference championship game.
Yeah.
I think it would set a bad precedent. I think it would set we don't want to go play in a conference championship game. And I think you might see conferences maybe try to quickly do away with those games. If their best teams or their second best teams are going to get punished like that, I don't think that's not what college football wants. So I think that they would adjust Alabama accordingly, but at the same time, probably try to make sure that they're still in the picture.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and obviously if it's not an Alabama team that's put itself in a strong position now, if it's a different team that's ranked maybe 10th or 11th, and, it feels more like they can't afford that third loss. But I think you're right. I think Alabama's put itself in a spot where the committee probably doesn't have to worry about that, no matter the outcome. And of course, ultimately, what Kalen DeBoer wants, what all these fans want, is as Alabama starts to steamroll toward the SEC championship, they want to win it. Because of course that means, like you said, the 2 seed and probably in a first round bye.
It also means to buy, so it means that you can, you can kind of have that rest, and you can, you don't have to worry about playing at somebody else's house. I don't see a situation where, even if, let's say, Missouri doesn't win the 2 games and Alabama's, doesn't get to play in the SEC championship game, so they finish 10-2. Maybe, depending on how things go, Alabama could sneak in and get an 8 seed, and then they're hosting in the playoff. I just actually don't see that, though. So I could see Alabama probably then being a 9 seed. And then so you really don't want to have to travel to somebody else's place in that first round. I think Alabama would probably win the matchup it would have in that round, but you don't want to have that, especially when you can avoid it. You can go straight into the, quarterfinals. So yeah, obviously. And then let's be serious here. Winning the SEC title is still a big deal as well.
Right.
So that's a huge goal for Alabama. And yeah, I mean, who would have thought that, following that Tennessee loss or following the Vanderbilt lost at Alabama could still be back-to-back SEC champions. I mean, that's quite an achievement. So there's a lot to play for. Obviously, the number one road is to go to the SEC championship game and win it. Of course,
it would be a big achievement, and also it's a testament to the chaotic nature of the SEC this season with Texas and Oklahoma joining. And so, do you see then in the hypothetical? So obviously, you're kind of playing out the scenarios of if Alabama doesn't make it to the SEC championship, it's a very likely road playoff game. Obviously, if they win the SEC, we know what happens. If they do get that third loss, do you then see, with the momentum they've gotten, do they host at that point, or is it still too low?
I don't think so. And so I kind of broke it down in a story on the site this week. I was saying that I was trying to bait you into kind of arguing about Indiana getting blown out because I know you like Indiana.
Well, I have a follow-up question related to Indiana that I can ask you before we get to predictions.
And let's go. If you just kind of like went with the favorites and just assume that Indiana didn't completely embarrass itself and still is a playoff team with one loss, I think when you kind of break things down, let's say Alabama loses to Texas, it's easier to have them lose to Texas to kind of eliminate Texas A&M from the picture. Because if they lose to Texas A&M, things get cloudier, right? So I'm just going to go with the favorites here when I'm making this projection. But so I'm just going to call it Big Ten winner because it's going to be either Ohio State, in my opinion, or Oregon. And I think that the winner of that game will be the number 1 seed and the loser will be the number 5 seed. I don't care if it's 12-1 Ohio State as the number 1 seed and 12-1 Oregon as the number 5 seed, or undefeated Oregon and 10-2. I still think a 10-2 Ohio State, the way that they treat them, is still probably going to get that 5 seed. So one of those two guys is going to be at 1-5. In my projection, I had Ohio State winning that game. So they were the number 1 team. I think the SEC champion will be number 2. In this case, since we're trying to project it with Alabama losing, we're going to give that to Texas. Then since we're just going favorites here, I went with the two betting favorites to win the conference. I have Miami winning the ACC at 12-1 and Colorado winning the Big 12 at 11-2. Those two teams would get the 3 and 4 seed just for being the next highest conference. I think you could maybe make an argument with Colorado and Boise State. I think the committee would give it to a Colorado at the 4 seed, but you could do Boise State. Whoever doesn't get it. So if they did give it to Boise State, Colorado or Boise State, one of those two teams will either be the 4 or the 12. It's kind of crazy how this works, but that's the way it works with the Colorado.
I'm listening to Reese Davis all over again. That poor guy has to do it every week.
Yeah, Colorado doesn't have any business being the number 4 seed. Neither does Boise State, but one of those two teams will get it. So then you bump it down. I think, I already said the number 5 seed would be the Big Ten loser in the championship game. I don't see Penn State losing. I don't see Notre Dame losing. The committee has seemed to be okay with them not really playing anybody. So you just have to assume that they would be 6 and 7. I don't see why that would change. I think it gets interesting at that 8 spot. Assuming Texas is the champion, I think that at this point, if everybody wins, you're going to have a Georgia, an Ole Miss, a Tennessee, and an Alabama from the SEC. 4 teams. You're also going to have Indiana. 5 teams really looking for 4 spots because you got to give that other spot to Boise, right? So one of them is going to have to go. I think to kind of help set aside some of those, set apart some of those SEC teams, the committee is going to emphasize Texas's like Georgia's win over Texas because Texas is now the SEC champ. Georgia went to Austin and beat Texas. I think they're going to get a lot of boost for that. So that's why I think you see Georgia then boost to the number 8 spot. They'll reward the Bulldogs with a home playoff game. I think then you probably see Indiana, assuming they didn't just totally embarrass themselves against Ohio State.
Yep.
I think the committee can kind of use that to kind of set Georgia aside from the other SEC teams, kind of use Indiana as that barrier at number 9. It also kind of, these things I don't necessarily know if they shouldn't matter, but they will. I don't think you want to see an SEC game. They don't want to see a rematch in that. So putting Indiana at that 9 spot and then sending them to Athens kind of eliminates things and it kind of sets things up. At the number 10 spot, I think is where you see Alabama come in. And I think that's where they would have 10. They'd be 10-3 compared to 10-2 Ole Miss and 10-2 Tennessee. But I think this is where you look at it and you say, Alabama is already so ahead of those two teams, or they're a couple spots up when you look at the 7 ranking. I think that shows what the committee thinks about Alabama. And I don't think they're going to punish them enough. So I think you put Alabama at that 10 spot. Then really you're only down to one more spot, because you got to remember the 12th spot's going to Boise or Colorado or whatever. And it's going to come down to Ole Miss and Tennessee. And right now Ole Miss is ahead of Tennessee, and they both kind of don't play crazy games for the remainder of the season. So I think, you probably give Ole Miss the nod for that 11th spot. It's really hard luck for Tennessee, who beat Alabama, had, one less loss than Alabama, same amount of wins, and is going to get left out. I think you're going to hear a lot about that. But that's kind of the way it goes. I guess theoretically they could take Tennessee instead of Ole Miss. It just doesn't seem like they're going to do that.
No, I think that was a great breakdown to show that is, if everything goes as scheduled, which it inevitably probably won't, whether it's, one of those SEC teams dropping themselves out of the race with a shock loss, whatever. But if everything does go how it's supposed to, however you have those teams ranked, it is going to be likely one of those 10-2 teams left out over in Indiana. And then, like you said, you've got a Colorado in the playoff and Boise State. And people aren't going to be too happy.
The problem we have in this playoff system is there really is no difference between a Big 12 and a Group of 5. Like, the Big 12 is not a power conference. It's not even close. And so you're really going to have two undeserving teams make the playoff. And I guess I get the notion that the Group of 5, having that spot there, it's to ensure that you don't overlook a team that, but now you're basically being forced to choose two of those teams. I'm okay with inviting a Boise State to the party, or inviting a Colorado to the party, but inviting both of them, I think it's just silly. I don't think the Big 12 is a power conference anymore. They don't have good teams. They don't have elite teams, And so, I mean, look at the way that they were treating BYU when they were an undefeated Power 4 team, and they were treating them like a Group of 5 team, because they are, because it is a Group of 5 conference. So that's one of the things I think you would need to fix. I don't think you necessarily need the automatic spots from the SEC. You just need to kind of recognize who the power conferences are. And I think that even the ACC is in a little bit of a risk of, losing its power conference. I think there's really two, big power conferences, and that's obviously the SEC and the Big Ten. At least the ACC has teams like Clemson and Miami, and
Florida State in a good year.
Florida State in a good year. They have teams that contend. I don't see that in the Big 12, and so I don't take the Big 12 seriously. But that's going to ultimately hurt Tennessee, because really what we should have is, this would be an easy discussion. If you had to take one of, even if you did the silly thing where you give the undeserving team a first round bye, I think it would come down to, who do you like more, Colorado or Boise? You'd take the winner of that one, or you take the, whoever you thought was that, and then you give Tennessee the 12th spot.
Right.
But now you can't do that, and I think Tennessee is going to be left out. And I think Tennessee is way more deserving than both of those teams. They're way more deserving than Boise. They're way more deserving than Colorado.
Not a good scenario if you're a Vols fan, in Tony's hypothetical.
Or Ole Miss. I mean, it's the same thing. If they did take Tennessee, I mean, shoot, if they really decide to punish Alabama and not take Alabama, I think Alabama is more deserving over those two teams. So it's tough. But I think it's going to be very unfair for Tennessee, and I don't. Under my scenario, I would hate to be a Vols fan, because it's unfair. You get to see a Colorado host while you're not even in the playoff.
I think the playoff,
Colorado wouldn't host, but Colorado get a bye,
right,
when you're not in the playoff.
I think you're if you're a playoff committee member, you're just hoping that the games can sort themselves out and hopefully give you, the answers that you're looking for, in terms of a team just dropping a random one, or, something getting sorted out. But we are heading for a really interesting decision.
Yeah. I mean, here's another scenario. I mean, we have all that, right? So I did that projection, and that's with the favorites winning. Right? That's with no upsets. I mean, I think you can, from a committee standpoint, you can get really in the weeds with it. What if Texas A&M wins, right? and they go and they've got 3 losses, and they lose in the SEC, or let's say okay, let's really get quirky here, okay? Texas A&M goes to the SEC championship game against Alabama, and Texas A&M wins. I actually, at that point, I'm not sure if Alabama makes it, because you've got a 3-loss Texas A&M team that's in there. What do you do with Texas? I actually think that I actually do think Alabama does make it, because I think a 10-3 Alabama makes it over a 10-2 Texas, because Texas hadn't beaten anybody. But like, now you're leaving out Texas, a team that everyone thought would be a title contender, a team with a really big brand name, a team that you've kind of propped up this whole time. And, are you going to then drop Texas from, where's Texas in the rankings right now? 3?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to drop Texas from 3 to out of the playoff. That's crazy, but that could be the case if A&M wins and then wins the SEC title. I think if A&M was to win and then lose the SEC title and they had 4 losses, I don't think that they would survive that,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
But
there's so much. I mean, shoot, like, yeah, you get into it. I just feel like something more shocking even is going to happen just from what we've seen this season.
I mean, like, I guess if you're the committee, you're like super rooting for Vanderbilt to upset Tennessee, because that would just kind of knock out that
make your
make
your things a lot easier.
If Vanderbilt was to knock out a Tennessee, then all of a sudden it just kind of slots in, and then you give Ole Miss that 11th spot. Or, I mean, shoot, the Egg Bowl is crazy. Like, there's no way that Mississippi State should beat this. But, like, if that was to happen, that would also help out the committee a lot, because then you just kind of see it.
I'm glad we got some Egg Bowl love. I can always appreciate that. My last playoff question before we get into our game picks is, should Alabama bench Jalen Milroe for the rest of the season to avoid a Florida State situation? Because that was a real scenario talked about from Indiana by Joey Galloway, which just, I think, sums up the whole
I'm not sure
shebang to me, which is just so funny.
Just being serious.
He might not have been, but he was enjoying the bid if he wasn't.
Yeah, it's a point. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, look, if Indiana was to lose their quarterback and lose to Ohio State, they'd be cooked. They wouldn't take them.
Right.
It's so interesting to see, if Indiana wins that, or if Indiana like what's going to happen in that game. Are they going to? They don't have a win, so their best, they don't have anything on their on their resume. So like their biggest accomplishment will be playing Ohio State as close as they can, and is that going to be enough? I mean, obviously they'll be 11-1, but 11-1 on a very cupcake schedule. So how are they going to be treated on that? Are they going to be knocked out with a loss? I kind of find it hard to believe that they're going to be knocked out on 11-1. But I mean, you could make the argument that Tennessee's done more 10-2 than Indiana's done it 11-1. So that, that's another argument you can make.
It's sparking beefs between Tennessee and Indiana fans, which is just, this is what college sports is all about. I love it. Yeah, I think, we just have to let the games
and what if Indiana wins? What if Indiana wins? What do you do with Ohio State, who kind of only, I guess they have that win over Penn State, but that's about it, and they won't play there. I think you could really see, when I talk about Alabama jumping to number 6 or possibly number 5, I think Alabama would jump over Ohio State if Ohio State loses this week. So I think, Alabama is pretty much guaranteed, in my opinion, to be the number 6 team heading into the SEC championship game, if they win out, obviously.
Yeah, which is obviously a good position for Alabama. And of course, they got to take care of business first and foremost themselves in these next 2 games, starting with Oklahoma, which is a good segue into our score predictions. Tony, would you like me to go first this week? You again had the closer score margin. I had 63-3. You had 45-3. They of course won 52-7 over Mercer. So you can pat yourself on the back for that one.
I can start first, because I already made my prediction on our Sooner site podcast. So I went with 34-10 Alabama. I think that it's going to be a game where Alabama controls it the whole time, and I think Oklahoma's defense will do enough to make it not like, I don't necessarily consider 34-10 like what I would call an embarrassing scoreline for the Sooners. So I think it'll be one of those that doesn't look as bad as it probably is, because Alabama is just going to control it. But I just don't see Oklahoma moving the ball that much. I'm giving them the 10 points just because maybe something happens. Like we talked about, people are going to be juiced up. Maybe they can catch Alabama sleeping early on. But I think it's relatively easy game for Alabama. And it's, I thought about maybe predicting another non-offensive touchdown. I'm not going to get too carried away with that. But I think the defense will do really well.
All right. Do you have a player? Which, credit to you, last week you had Richard Young, who of course.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Jalen Milroe to kind of like, this is a good game where he can maybe even, he's not gonna win the Heisman. I mean, there's just, I think especially when you look at like Colorado potentially making the playoff and then Boise making the playoff, I think it's gonna go to either Gene Tree or Travis Hunter. I think one of those two will kind of. I think the Heisman really comes down to one of them, or maybe Dylan Gabriel. But I just think, Jalen Milroe's kind of down in that list, right? But yeah. I do think he can make a little bit of a push and maybe even get to New York with two pretty good games. I'm interested to see, what is he at, like 17? Is he 17 rushing and 15 passing?
Correct.
Touchdowns. Like, could he have like a 3 touchdown passing game against Oklahoma and 1 rushing touchdown, and then maybe go 2-2 against Auburn, and then all of a sudden, like, he's entering the SEC championship game with a 2020 season? Like, that'd be interesting, right? I mean, like, I think it'd be interesting to get Jalen. He'll probably have 3 games to do it before the Heisman. Can he get to 2020 before they vote on, before they announce the Heisman? I don't think it's going to matter, but it will at least kind of put him more in the conversation for it. And I think this is a good game for him, maybe to kind of boost his Heisman chances. So that's why I'm taking Jalen as my guy.
Yeah, I think it's a fun narrative to keep watching, that 2020 thing. Obviously, only 2 SEC quarterbacks have ever done it, is Cam Newton and Tim Tebow, and they both won the Heisman. I agree with you. Jalen's probably a little too far off for that, but it would be a fun narrative in the last 2 games of the season. I went for a relatively similar scoreline. I went for 28-7 Alabama. I went for a little bit more of a defensive stand, I guess, from both teams, a little less scoring from Oklahoma, and Alabama just misses out on that 30-point mark. I do think Oklahoma's defense is good, and I kind of think that side of the ball will be the one to step up with the whole senior day, voodoo magic, whatever you want to call it. Danny Stutzman's a good leader for them. So I've got them holding Alabama under 30, but I still have the Tide comfortably in Norman. And I picked Jeremy Bernard as my player to watch. Kind of just went with a random one. Maybe he gets a deep shot from Jalen Milroe in one of these game-breaking drives. So I'll pick the Washington transfer receiver. We'll see how it goes for the Crimson Tide in Norman, Oklahoma, 6:30 for that game. Let's finish things off, Tony. Week 13 picks to end the show. Revisiting Week 12. Man, don't really want to do this one because I went 0 for last week in Week 12 predictions. The games we did last week, Tennessee, Georgia. You had the Dogs. I picked the Volunteers. Georgia ended up winning that game by 14. Kansas State, Arizona State. Kansas State, 8.5-point favorites, lost to the Sun Devils by 10 points. So you got that one as well. We both bet on South Carolina to cover a 12-point spread against Mizzou. They only won by 4. So
yeah, that was a surprise.
Very crazy game in Columbia, South Carolina. LSU, Florida. We also both picked the Tigers, who were 4.5-point favorites. They lost, ending their college football playoff hopes in Baton Rouge, or I guess it was in Florida, but no playoff for LSU. And then Tulane, Navy. I went with the Navy. Tulane won that game by 35 points. You got that one right. So you went 3 for 5 last week. I went 0 for. So I've got to do better this week. And we're going to start with another Service Academy game. Number 19, Army, undefeated. Can they spoil the college football playoff party with an upset over Notre Dame to stay undefeated? The number 6 Fighting Irish, of course, also really cannot afford another loss this year. They are 14.5-point favorites. I have to check again where this game is being played. I think it's in New York, but I will verify. I know it is not in Notre Dame, but do you like the Fighting Irish here by 14.5? It is in Yankee Stadium.
Oh, Is Notre Dame going to wear
Favorite
some
place?
stupid pinstripe uniform?
I have not seen a uniform reveal yet for Notre Dame, but that would
they broke that out. That was terrible. No, I think Notre Dame's going to win. I'd like to give you some creative answer about why Army has a chance. They just don't. I don't even know if that makes the like. I think you could say that knocking out Notre Dame could make the committee's job easier, but then like what the heck do they do with Army if they beat Notre Dame? So I mean, Army's probably in the way high in the playoff picture at that point, which would be just crazy. So yeah, I think that I think Notre Dame's just probably going to roll in this one. I think this is one of those cases where Army hasn't played anyone, and this nice little story kind of ends right now.
You're most definitely going to be right, but I'm still going to go with Cinderella because that is who I am. I'm a believer in fun stories.
Here. Yeah.
Give me the Service Academy. Give me the Cadets. Army, why not?
The line again for that? What did you say the line was?
14.5. So maybe they'll at least cover. Maybe they'll just, run option Notre Dame to death, just chew clock and win that game by 10 or lose that game by 10 points.
Probably not, but whatever.
We can dream. A man can dream.
The Army in the playoff, that'd be fun.
It would be very fun. It would
Army's
be fun.
gonna win that game and then lose to Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
or lose to Tulane in the American Championship. I promise I pick these games before we go on air, so I promise I didn't mean to do this to you with the Big 12 after your spiel about them not being a Power 5 conference, but we do have 2 Big 12 games because it does kind of affect who gets the bid here.
No, it's an interesting conference. It's just not a Power 5 conference.
Fair. So first one, we will do the ranked game. Actually, I'll do the ranked versus unranked first because it's the team that the betting favorites have as going to the playoff as the Big 12 representative. Colorado, number 16, 3-point favorites on the road against a very, very frisky 4-6 Kansas team that has kind of figured it out under Lance Leipold. And I say all that just to give them some pump up before considering they're unranked and 4-6. But that's why this line is the way it is. Who do you like in this one, Tony? Do you like Kansas maybe eliminating Dion and the Buffaloes?
No, I'm rolling with Dion and the Buffaloes. Like I said, I have them in my playoff projection, and so yeah, I think they're gonna. I'll pick them here, and I'll pick them to win the whole Big 12. I think it's gonna be fun. I think that it will just add some kind of interest to even more interest to the playoff because they're such a polarizing team. So I'm actually kind of rooting for them to make it.
I'm right there with you. I've got Colorado. I also will never pick Kansas in anything. But I like Colorado here to roll. I agree. I would love to see them in the playoff. I think it's a fun story. Congrats to them too. Julian Lewis, 5-star quarterback, committed there on Thursday when we're recording.
Over for Shador.
No Keelan Russell, but he's a 5-star. 5-star. Go a little Alabama homer for you. Other Big 12 game. This is the ranked one. 2 teams also trying to vie to take Colorado's spot. We're doing BYU again. Number 14, BYU. Number 21, Arizona State. The Sun Devils have clawed their way back into the Big 12 playoff race. They are 3-point favorites at home. Who do you like in here?
I was going to pick Arizona State as this upset team before BYU lost. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to pick them. And I know they're a 3-point favorite, but so they're not actually the underdog in this one, but I like them, especially at home. I think Arizona State wins this one.
I'm going to match you again. I like the Sun Devils. I feel like everyone was kind of preying on BYU's downfall. They were, of course, beaten by Kansas, giving them a little bit more life against Colorado. But yeah, I like Arizona State in this one. The Sun Devils to roll. The only other SEC game, not too many good ones this week. I was trying to think of things that could implicate Alabama in the playoff. A lot of cupcake games. Texas playing Kentucky. I think Ole Miss is playing someone. If Ole Miss is playing Florida, that one could maybe be a little bit weird. But this is the other one that I thought. What?
Are we picking the Auburn game?
We're picking the Auburn game. Texas A&M Auburn is really the only one I think this week that's got a huge chance to shake things up in the playoff race or the SEC championship race. Texas A&M, 2.5-point favorites heading into Jordan-Hare. Does that stadium cause a little bit of a ripple effect for the SEC championship, Tony?
I was told that Elko, I didn't see the clip myself, but I heard where Elko said that he's trying to make a point that they were focused on Auburn and instead of Texas, and he's like, and our 100% of our focus is on Texas. I mean Auburn. So that's kind of funny. It just shows you how big that matchup is next week. That being said, A&M's not going to need 100% of its focus on Auburn. I think that I'll take the Aggies in this one.
This is normally where I would pick Auburn to have the kind of fun upset pick, but I am riding with a take that I'm going to carry into the SEC championship game because I think that's going to be Alabama's opponent in the SEC championship. I think they're going to play Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is going to beat Auburn.
Yeah.
I think Texas A&M is going to beat Auburn, and I think they're going to beat Texas. I think this A&M team is really, really good. I like Mike Elko despite his clear overlooking of this Auburn team. And Jordan-Hare is a weird place to play. But I like the Aggies. I think this team's really good. Them and South Carolina are kind of my two. I've been kind of pumping them up lately to end this season. So give me Texas A&M. And then to finish things off, we were going to do this one. We're going to the Big Ten. Indiana, number 5, putting their undefeated season on the line in the Horseshoe. At the time of recording, I don't know how much this line's going to change. Ohio State is favored by 12 points. I think we've made our stances clear on this game. So I'll ask you this, Tony. If Indiana manages to cover that spread, is that enough for you to keep them in the playoff?
I mean, they're going to be in the playoffs. What have they done to make the playoffs if that's the case? Like, what have they done? What is it showing you?
Won all their games. They've won all their games.
What I'm saying is, how different is their schedule than, I don't know, Boise State's? And I know Boise State's going to make it, but yeah,
it's not. But they won them. Other teams haven't. They won the games.
Schedule different than why are we taking them over SMU?
They won. SMU's lost.
SMU's also won,
but they haven't not all the games.
But they'll have a loss against BYU
State. Actually.
Yeah, I think that no, but I'm saying Indiana will have a loss at that point to Ohio State, and no wins. I mean, I think I would take Tennessee. I would take Ole Miss. I would take a lot of teams. I mean, shoot, I would take a 10-3. I'd want A&M in there. I mean, at least they beat somebody, right? I don't like that you can have a schedule and not play anyone. But that being said, yeah, they'll make it. 11-1 is 11-1. They play and they've just managed to get past every single hard team in the Big Ten and not have to play. So I don't know. I think that they'll make it. I don't think they should.
I think my argument here is you are just going to have these years every so often where you have exactly what you just said, where these conferences are so big, you're going to have a team like Indiana this year where they don't get any of the big teams on their schedule and they manage to rattle off all these wins. And this is where, they find themselves. It's just happened to happen in the first year of the college football playoff. 12 teams.
The real thing I don't like about Indiana is when you look at Texas, right? You can say that Texas is in the same boat, but at least Texas scheduled somebody that was supposed to be better than they were. Texas's strength of schedule gets burned by Michigan just sucking and coming off and losing all those players. But at least they went to Michigan. Indiana didn't play anyone. They don't have anyone on the schedule. It's not even like they had a disappointing schedule. I get that they kind of came out of nowhere and the success is new to them, but it's just we're going to reward them for that. Look, a lot of it's too is how do they play in this game? Are they playing to win? Are they playing to cover? If they really push Ohio State, then yeah, maybe, I'm a lot more open to them making the playoff. But if it's just a matter of Ohio State blows them out and Indiana gets a couple garbage touchdowns to make it a 12-point game instead of a 25-point game, that's not going to do much for me.
Yeah, I think we just have to play the game. We got to play the game, see what happens.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'm not adverse. I know I probably sound like an Indiana hater. I'm not adverse to them making it if they're deserving, but I just don't want to be gifted. I don't like that Penn State's making it. What has Penn State done? And they're not even undefeated. Who has Penn State beaten? It's the same. They're going to get a home playoff. So
They technically do have a ranked win over Illinois, who was
Yeah.
19 when they beat them.
Yeah, but it's not a ranked win anymore, you know?
No, yeah, yeah. I just think it's funny. I just clicked on their schedule and that just popped up. And
Yeah, I mean, I'm just as upset with Penn State. In fact, I feel like maybe even with Indiana.
Notre Dame is going to make it in with a loss to Northern Illinois.
Yeah, I to be honest with you, right now, if you're going to put Indiana in, then you should probably have them ahead of Penn State, right? I mean, if they are undefeated right now, they should be currently ahead of Penn State.
Notre Dame hasn't played a true road game since September 14th at Purdue.
Yeah, that's goofy as well. Notre Dame's going to lose to USC though. So that's what's going to happen.
There we go. Yeah, I just want all the chaos. Yeah, I'm a Cinderella fan. This is just who I am. Nothing will get me off this hill.
That's my sneaky, I could see it happening, just going off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, USC has no business beating Notre Dame, but
a big letdown game. They're on the road.
They got some talent on that. It's a long trip. It's a rivalry game. That's basically a bowl game for USC. So yeah.
Yep, absolutely. That's a good shout. Give me Indiana. They're gonna win. I'm gonna put that public right now. Indiana's upsetting Ohio State in the shoe.
On the record, I am taking
my final word.
I'm almost tempted to take Indiana because it's a big spread, but I'm not gonna go. I'm gonna take Ohio State.
Indiana.
I think Ohio State wins by 17.
Kirk Cignetti.
Signasty.
He will not be denied. Got the contract extension, which actually is usually bad. Usually when they get that, then they start losing. That's actually a bad. You got to wait till after the year to give them the contract to bump. Nate Oates learned that in the SEC tournament last year.
Sure, but I think I'm interested in that one. I want Indiana to be good. I want Indiana to win that game and kind of prove everyone wrong. And because I want to feel better about Indiana making the playoff. I want them to make it undefeated, because then there's no questioning whether or not they deserve it. Because at that point they would be undefeated and they would have a good win under their belt. So yeah, I guess I'm rooting for Indiana. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Give me Signasty. I've been all in. I'm staying all in. That's the final word. Hope everyone enjoys the Alabama game. If you're going, stay warm in Norman, Oklahoma. It's getting a little bit of a chill in the air in Alabama as well. So enjoy the atmosphere, enjoy the game. We'll obviously have a recap for you for it heading into next week. And then we turn to Iron Bowl, which will be very, very fun. So enjoy the game. Subscribe here. Subscribe to Side Illustrated. We will see you next time.